This audio is best experienced with headphones. It touches lightly upon themes such as suicide and substance abuse. Hello there, stranger. Welcome back to my little corner of the internet. I am the Laughing Rook, and it is a pleasure to have you. Today we follow a man as he sees an immutable truth. So come, take a seat, smash the subscribe button and join me by the fire. Written by Edward the Crazy Man, our story today, I witnessed the end, alongside a floating brain. It was like any other day. That's an awful way to begin. It was nothing like any other day. The sky was overcast, with the sun making short attempts to burst through the thick dark blanket above with small success. I was standing in my flat, staring from the second-story window at the frothing sea, the dock workers, the people passing by one another. The rain met the window pane in long tears that accumulated at the base of the windowsill. The internal machinations of an everyman were far beyond me, as this had been the portal to the whole entire world for me since my 5th birthday. I'd been put here in this flat by my mother. My father was some seafaring man that had kin at every port. I lived in that place with my mother till the day she died, from morphine overdose. The visiting doctors theorized it had been a suicide from an issue in her mind. A sickness of the mind could never be cured, not really, so rather than alleviate the struggle, she'd win the fight one sweaty twilight 2 years prior to the night I found myself looking out that window. She still had the needle in her stiff corpse when my grandfather had phoned the police. My grandfather, a man hardly ever at home to begin with, travelled from place to place, earning what money he could. I never understood the man, but his ruddy face beamed from long hours in the sun, and his leather hands could snap a lesser man's jaw. But he was the joker, the clown, the jolly sort. He'd hopped aboard a ship shortly after the death of my mother, and I'd not seen him since. As a ward of the state, I had my dole. Beyond essentials, there was hardly anything left. Still, the man that delivered my groceries slipped me paperback novels here and there. It took ages to accumulate the meager library beneath my bed. I stared out the window and watched the people living their lives. It's a funny thing, watching the people from merely yards away, never further than shouting distance, and yet I saw them live their lives. The children grew up, the parents shrank into wrinkled, wicked things. Examining humanity through the window was perhaps the most excruciating thing. That's not entirely true. The hooligans that shouted up at me while I tried to sleep at night was the worst. They'd chuck rocks at my window and holler till dawn. I tried once pouring hot water on them, but I was fined for that. So I let them be. They did not pay me the same courtesy. How long had it been since I'd been staring out that window? I couldn't remember my exact age. Sometimes it felt as though my voice had long since shriveled away. I would cough into my hand or work out a noise so as to convince myself that I'd not lost it. My social skills were weak among my peers, and I knew I'd never marry. That was an aspiration I'd long given up on. I wasn't quite human. I wasn't so far removed from one, but there was hardly a passing thought of being exactly man anywhere in my mind. I was an ever-present observer to a world I could not fathom. The day went along till it was black night. I watched as a man coming from the docks, maybe swaggering tipsy from old rum, leaned against a set of tarp-covered crates. He held his sides as the vomit came. After straightening his flat cap, he twisted around to meander down the way, but he was stopped by a pair of shadowed large figures. The shining blade stood out in dark contrast against the moonlight, and within moments the poor drunkard was on the ground, reaching out his clawed fingers. He'd been robbed, undoubtedly, and given the way he laid in the street as the thieves scampered away, he was dying. All I could do is watch. I didn't dare scream. I didn't dare phone the police. I didn't dare disturb the world out there because it wasn't mine. The man there on the ground flailed his arms, and I could see, for the very briefest of moments, a flash of white light escape from the back of his throat and fire into the sky like the gorgeous spirit it was. It was the man's essence I saw leave. I watched him from my window, and as he went still, I closed the curtains, withdrawing into another world with a good book. That night I was plagued by wild dreams of men and women being turned inside out. They roped off the crime scene and interviewed the other tenants of my building. I was the last the police approached, as I'd received quite the reputation among my community. People knew I was the weird, lonely bachelor living on the second floor. The police hardly took me seriously, and I couldn't care. I didn't tell them about the way the man had died. The reality of what happened that night might as well have been something from one of my fiction books. The real thing that bothered me most was how his spirit had left his body. It must have been a delusion of some kind. There was no way I'd seen what I thought I'd seen. Right? Days went on, and whenever I watched the people down on the street, I paid a keen eye to the things that followed them. I'd never seen them before, but nevertheless there they were. Great white mist-like creatures that hovered over the people's every move. I am forced to recall the wild hallucinations of my mother whenever she would call out the forces beyond reason during one of her indulgent trips down the morphine railway. She would stare at the walls with wide, sobering eyes, as though there were an alien creature directly in front of her. Then she would pull my face to meet hers and tell me that the thing following me was made of the purest white light she'd ever seen. When I think of this, I'm given chills. It's preposterous, of course. There are no such things as spirits, and they most certainly don't follow us around. And yet, I see them every day. The man delivering my groceries upon entering my flat had a dark, foreboding nature about him. I could feel it more than I could physically see it. As he stepped out of my abode, he waved me goodbye, and I saw the lingering presence of his spirit. It was soft and slow, falling into his step as though it were confused by some time dilation. It came as no surprise to me when I was notified that he'd died in a freak accident. The poor bastard had been struck by a fallen power line. I could only wonder if a white light shot from his body when he died. I've studied myself in the mirror, and I can tell you that I've yet to see a thing following me. I keep waiting for it. Sometimes I'm sure I can feel the presence of the thing over my shoulder. I wonder whether they're spirits or beings from a dimension unknown. Whatever the case, I decided to keep a close watch over the people's spirits from then on. Then the brain came. I was half reading from a book and half watching from my window as I sipped on a bit of OJ. Something out of the corner of my eye forced me to put my book down and stand to press my face against the glass. Standing in the street there was a spirit without an owner. It stood as frozen as a pillar while the people passed by without noticing it. I had to consciously force myself to breathe. For the briefest of moments, I was certain the thing would suck my innards away. It did not. Instead, it gently glided up to my second-story window and lingered there for a moment, waiting for me to open the window. I felt cold sweat all over me. Did it want me to open the window? Did it wish to carry me outside? Before I could wonder the possibilities, I was reaching out for the window, prying it up, and seeing the thing without the murky shade of the window. There it was, in stunning clarity. A screaming, wide-open mouth, shaped of smoke or some ether-like vapor. I expected the thing to drag me out right then and there. It did not. It stretched itself to infinity in a vertical line till there was nothing left but an opening, a pocket, a beautiful thing beyond that human eyes could not conceive. What swelled from that gash of light in the material world was nothing short of a miracle. The bulbous brain slipped its way into this reality, and the thing beyond closed so that I could never have said it existed. The brain hovered in my flat, closing my window by some unseen force.
"What are you?"
The words croaked from me.
No time,
said the brain.
You must understand. I must show you, enlighten you. Humanity's time has come and passed already. Time does not exist on a line. It is merely the way that you perceive it. But there is hope yet for your kind, perhaps. You are, after all, no more than a collection of many collapsed dimensions.
My mouth agape, I could feel my own brain rattling within my skull. The whole world came crashing down around me, and it was rebuilt within moments like melting glass. I could see yonder upon the horizon a great fleshy black globe with spider appendages that sprang out in all directions, miles in length. The thing that I knew in my heart of hearts to be a creature of uncanny magnitude came crashing into the earth, and there was nothing left there save me and the floating brain once the shockwave subsided. It took some time to realize I was screaming. Once in the place of man-made structure came the great fleshy pylons from the ground, whipping tendrils groping out at one another, until the pylons were connected in some rubbery fibrous tissues, entirely organic in nature. Flesh became earth and fire became sky. The floating brain did not speak words, but I'm sure that eons went by and I spoke many. My mouth chattered as time fell away around me, and the pylons and the great gory monstrosities that came with the passage of time too left and were replaced by a vast nothingness. A void. Worse than a void. There was no air, and my lungs were of no use in that place. I was gasping, and they were long disintegrating to dust like that of an hourglass. I'm sure that I could not have been there in that physical plane, because it was not physical in the slightest. We were merely floating through space without stars. Open black as I watched twirling astral debris fly by in blinks. It took too long or no time at all for me to realize that we were in fact not moving, but that everything moved around us. I stood in that nothing there, and the floating brain turned so that its frontal lobe would face me. It is not until now that I wonder why there were no eyes to speak of.
You see then that terrible things are right on the horizon, for you and yours. You must warn them.
Then it came. The light at the edge of my periphery swelled until it consumed my vision entirely, and I was no longer standing in space alongside that eldritch thing, but craning out of the window of my flat. Beneath, lining the wall of my building, were a series of young rapscallions gawking up at me with wild expressions. I felt a solid object sting me between the eyes. Then came the downpour of blood, smoothing down my nose. Touching my fingers to the spot on my brow, I realized one of the children had thrown a rock at me. Lucky shot. Glancing down again, I could see the mischievous grin of a small girl with her face tucked into a beanie and fisherman's coat. I slammed the window and tended to my wound. Had I lost my mind? Had I experienced some sort of mental break? What was the matter with me? After waiting for the blood to stop coming with a piece of cotton pressed against my forehead, I began moving through the apartment. My joints ached and I felt simultaneously dizzy and lucid all at once. I've read about whiplash, and I'm inclined to believe that I was suffering some cosmic version of that. Every time I tried focusing in on the images I saw, I could audibly hear the vessels in my head popping. I would have attributed this to hallucination if it were not for the fact that I stood in the frame of my mirror and saw that my right eyeball had pooled with the crimson liquid. I've been haunted with the images in that place the brain took me. It is the future. Those monstrosities. I know they are coming. They will take us, they will meet us in space and swallow us in wrath. They will flay us, free us of our skins, and sew us together so that the earth is wrapped in the gore. They are coming. Each morning I wake up to flood my eyes of the stain the images have left there. I'm going blind. I've left the apartment for the first time since I was 5 years old, and I grab people on the streets in the daylight screaming at them to help me, prepare, do something. The people must know of their imminent doom. I'm a raving loon and no one believes me. They think I've a rotten brain no matter how I struggle. Most times this ends with me being locked up for the night, but I know better than them. I try to tell them of what has yet to come, what always will be, what has passed. There is no place for an oracle in this modern world, and yet I do it. Consider this to be no different. What is coming for us all is the most damnable evil. The nightmares only wear on to the point that I'm having a difficult time distinguishing what they are and what the real world is. Have they come already? The ghastly white things that follow passers-by have only grown bolder, and I am certain they are connected. I can say with absolute certainty that they know I know of them. Sometimes I awaken in the middle of the night to those awful nightmares, and I can see something misty white lingering over my headboard. I am frozen still as I look up through one blurry eye, and I wonder if this is what my mother saw. Thank you for listening to this reading. Ever the curious thing that he who knows the truth is condemned to ridicule and disbelief. Remember to like and subscribe to see more such content suggested to you in future. Thanks to Omen, the guest voice who played the role of the brain. If you'd like to leave your thoughts on Edward the Crazy Man's story on Nosleep, there is a link in the description, as well as a link to his subreddit, where much more horror fiction awaits. If you'd like to join my Discord server and submit something to read or make a suggestion for a future video, there's a link for that too. There is always more to come, so please, stay tuned. I'm the Laughing Rook, and you've been a most welcome visitor. Until next time, friend.